Welcome back to the 93rd online episode of Peacetime, hosted every Sunday morning by Peace Point with myself, Phra Nicholas Thanissaro, coming to you today from DIMC in Assāsa, California. In the previous session, we looked at meditation and mysticism, and today we return to our journey through an anthology of important suttas from the Buddhist scriptures by looking at a discourse called the Kalama Sutta. I estimate today's session will run to about 60 minutes with a 30-minute break halfway through for some meditation. So as usual with our chosen sutta, we will work our way through the sequence of sources, sutta name meaning, interlocutors, place names and overview, before looking at the main body of the manuscript itself, the outcome of the sutta, and finishing up with some of the issues the sutta raises. Today we're looking at the Kalama Sutta, which comes from the Anguttara Nikaya or Numerical Discourses and is referenced A1188 or AN 3.65. So for the translation of the primary source, we are using the 1980 second edition of Nyayaponika Theras and Bhikkhu Bodhi's Anguttara Nikaya Numerical Discourses of the Buddha, an anthology part 1. Published by the Buddhist Publication Society. So the actual name of the sutta we are studying today is not really the Kalama Sutta, but the Kesamutti Sutta, in reference to the location, but in the West it's better known as the Kalama Sutta, in reference to the group of people it was given to. So a good translation of the sutta name in English would be the Discourse to the Kalamas of Kesaputta. The main place that appears in this sutta is Kesaputta, sometimes known as Kesamutti village in the kingdom of Kosala. The sutta is believed to have taken place at the Kesariya Stupa, which is 68 miles from Patna in modern-day Bihar province in India. According to the commentary, the town of Kesaputta was situated at the edge of a forest and thus served as a way station for various groups of wanderers and ascetics. So as we see in paragraph 1, it is through this town of the Kalamas called Kesaputta, which the Blessed One was wandering on a tour together with a large sangha of monks. So the sutta is a conversation between the Buddha, who is referred to as the Blessed One, the Sublime One, or the Lord, and a clan of householders called the Kalamas. So to start with a quick synopsis of the Kalama Sutta, it is often described as the Buddha's charter for free inquiry. But while it certainly discourages blind belief, it does not quite advocate the supremacy of personal opinion in the spiritual domain. One important criterion for sound judgment that the Buddha will propose, as we shall see, is the opinion of the wise, and applying this criterion implies that one is prepared to recognize others as wiser than oneself, and to accept their recommendations in confidence they will ensure one's long-term benefit. Nonetheless, the sutta is perhaps the most misquoted and misused Buddhist text. When the Venerable Somatera translated the sutta in 1981 with the tagline, "The Buddha's Charter for Free Inquiry," it meant that this sutta is often cited alongside Sangharakshita's famous Tattva Sangraha commentary statement that the Buddha's word should be accepted by the wise only after investigation, not out of respect for the Buddha, just as gold is accepted only after heating, cutting, and rubbing. So those who are summarily or vaguely take the Kalama Sutta to be a carte blanche for free thinking, agnosticism, or plain intellectual laziness, they would be sorely disappointed to see, after a careful study of the discourse, that is much more than a charter of free inquiry. In fact, it is better described as a guide for the perplexed, for which the highlight is a guarantee of spiritual liberation. So the Kalama Sutta is about how to recognize the personal, social, spiritual, and universal good of spiritual teachings through cautious reduction of 10 doubt-worthy points. Moral good is not beliefs, rituals, or vows dictated by any sort of authority, but experience for oneself. Here, experience for oneself doesn't just mean common sense, but refers to how we develop our minds. So, mental clarity characterized with love, truth, joy, and peace. Finally, the sutta teaches us why doing good is clearly better than doing bad. So, a synopsis of the Kalama Sutta is that the Kalamas approach the Buddha. They ask the Buddha about the criterion for value of spiritual truth claims. The Buddha answers their inquiries in terms of the 4 Divine Abidings and the 4 self-assurances. So coming back to the manuscript at the beginning of paragraph 2, we learn that the visits of various spiritual gurus to their town had exposed the citizens of Kesaputta to a wide variety of philosophical theories. But these systems of thought conflicted with one another, therefore causing doubt and confusion. So as we see in paragraph 2, the Kalamas express praise of the Buddha in a standardized way, seeing him as fit to adjudicate and give them some criteria to help them overcome their state of perplexity in the face of the spiritual free-for-all. So as we see in paragraph 3, the Kalamas of Ketaputta approached the Blessed One. Some paid homage to him and sat down to one side. Some exchanged greetings with him, and after the greetings and cordial talk sat down to one side. Some saluted him reverentially and sat down to one side. Some remained silent and sat down to one side. So even amongst the Kalamas there was a wide variety of levels of enthusiasm for the Buddha's opinion. So having sat down, the Kalamas posed their question to the Buddha, saying, "There are, Lord, some ascetics and Brahmins who come to Kesaputta. They explain and elucidate their own doctrines, but disparage, debunk, revile, and vilify the doctrines of each other. For us, Lord, there is perplexity and doubt as to which of these good ascetics speak truth and which speak falsehood." So we see in paragraph 4 from the Buddha's response to the Kalama's request for clarification, "It is fitting for you to be perplexed, O Kalamas. It is fitting for you to be in doubt. Doubt has arisen in you about a perplexing matter." So at this point, the Buddha goes on to list 10 untrustworthy sources of wisdom, or as they're sometimes explained, things that may lead to blind faith, that can be divided into 3 main categories. The first category of untrustworthy sources of wisdom is tradition and includes 4 factors: oral tradition, lineage of teaching, hearsay, and collections of the scriptures. The first is oral tradition, or in Pali language, anusavena, which is generally understood to refer to information acquired by repetition, since false or incorrect information does not become any truer just because it is repeated again and again. This common sense view is often ignored by charlatans who try to tout a counterintuitive statement by repeatedly asserting it, usually with elevated voices and tempers. In the time of the Buddha, oral tradition would have referred to the Vedic tradition, which, according to the Brahmins, had originated with the primal deity and had been handed down orally through successive generations. The second type of unreliable source of wisdom from tradition is lineage of teaching, or in Pali language, parangparaya, which signifies an unbroken succession of teachings or teachers. The Buddha also cautions against legends, which are stories based on unproven facts. A legend or tradition sometimes appears factual, but cannot be fully verified. Religion and history are full of legends and traditions which are suggestive stories aimed at glorifying famous teachers or leaders, or where the moral of the story is often more valuable than the details of the legend itself. Third form of unreliable sources of wisdom from tradition is hearsay or report, as it's known in Pali language, itikaraya, which may mean popular opinion or general consensus. The Buddha puts this source of information in the same category as rumor, which tends to come from unverified sources, usually circulated from one person to another. Online social networking makes us particularly vulnerable to rapid spread of this category of information, whether it is urban legends, misinformation, disinformation, or conspiracy theories. The fourth form of unreliable sources of wisdom from tradition is a collection of scriptures, or in Pali language, Pitaka Sampadanena, which signifies any collection of religious texts regarded as infallible. Most religions regard their own scriptures as unquestionable. They are not treated like normal books or literature which can be criticized, objectivized, and fact-checked. Some religions even regard their scriptures as like a living creature that is inviolable and needs to be treated with respect. To some extent, even Buddhism follows some of these trends. However, the Buddha seems to be saying that even scriptures are to be questioned. Unlike other religions, Buddhism does not claim that scripture gains authority through divine revelation. Although they might represent the original words of a sage, but they may have been corrupted over time. In the Buddha's time, the Indian Vedic scriptures were viewed as sacred revelations. The same hands-off approach are applied even down to the present day to the Torah, the Bible, and the Quran. You only need to look at the social media backlash when they burn holy books at protests. What the Buddha seems to be saying, though, is that revelation cannot replace reason. To quote Porgy's song from Porgy and Bess, that got Gershwin in trouble for casting doubt on the Bible, it ain't necessarily so. What the Buddha seems to be advising is that just because it makes it into a scripture doesn't mean that it can be accepted as true for as long as it is unproven. The second set of untrustworthy sources of wisdom, comprising the next four terms, refers to four types of reasoning, recognized by thinkers and debaters in the time of the Buddha. The first of these unreliable sources of information from reasoning is logical reasoning, or in the Pali language, taka hetu gahena. It means avoiding simply accepting something apparently logical for as long as it remains unproven. We rely a lot on assumptions and educated guesses, often assuming that things will continue to be true as they have always been that way in the past. We may not be aware that circumstances have changed. We need to be open to the fact that we may not have all the facts or information at our fingertips. Less than logical reasoning is easily shaped by prejudices and ought still to be up for questioning, even when asserted by recognized authorities. The second of these unreliable sources of wisdom from reasoning is inference or deductive reasoning, or as it's known in the Pali language, Naya hetu kahena. We should not accept something simply because it is axiomatic or seems self-evident. To question an axiom seems to go against reason, but it may be the highest reason. Many things once accepted in society as axioms and touchstones of science and civilization have now been discredited and rejected, whether it be apartheid, patriarchy, or flat earth beliefs. And the courage to question has resulted in social and scientific progress. The third of these unreliable sources of wisdom from reasoning is specious reasoning, or in the Pali language, akara brahmavihāra. Specious reasoning asserts ideas which are plausible, seemingly correct or logical, but which with investigation are found to be erroneous or false. They can be what we regard as half-truths. Political campaigns and religious debate tend to make liberal use of this sort of assertions. The fourth of these unreliable sources of wisdom from reasoning is acceptance of a view after pondering it, or in the Pali language, Titi Nijjana Kandiya. Although we may be quick to trust new ideas that seem to conform with our common sense, unfortunately common sense can sometimes be plagued by biases or prejudices that seem to support enlightened self-interest at the expense of greater long-term well-being for all. So what the Buddha is advocating is that we should reach towards uncommon sense that can arise only from extended study and practice of transcendental teachings. The third set of untrustworthy sources of wisdom, comprising the final two terms, includes two types of personal authority or teacher-related factors. The first of these unreliable sources of wisdom from personal authority is personal charisma or apparent competence of the speaker, known in Pali language as pavaya rupadhaya. This might include the speaker's external qualifications, such as a prestigious education, a large following, or patronage by the palace. We should not be swayed to accept ideas simply because of the apparent ability or expertise of someone's rhetoric. Having higher academic degrees does not automatically make a person an authority in any field other than the field that they have studied. The second of these unreliable sources of wisdom from personal authority is the speaker's power relationship to oneself, or in the Pali language, samano no garu. This might include that they are one's personal teacher, because the Pali word garu used here is identical with the Sanskrit for guru. The Buddha is saying that we should not agree with an idea just to toe the line for our teacher's views. Of course, it is not easy to question a speaker that has been put on a pedestal or someone who you have a personal debt of gratitude to. However, failing to allow for this weakens spiritual lineages. It makes for personality cults and leads to all the scandals that come from religious organizations marking their own homework. So to conclude, most of the Buddha's advice aligns with the contemporary prerogative to question authority. So having advised the Kalamas to question those 10 untrustworthy sources of wisdom, the Buddha goes on to encourage the Kalamas to reflect on their own experience instead, without any need for him to impose his authority on them. Ultimately, according to the Buddha, no matter what the character or the source of an idea, we need to judge whether that idea is fruitful or unfruitful for our own lives. It conforms with the advice the Buddha gave his disciples on his deathbed to be a refuge to themselves and a light for themselves. So here in the Kalama Sutta, we are given the methodology for determining the truth of our life from within ourselves. The Buddha's advice in this respect comes from the form of a Socratic-style questioning and answers with the Kalamas, a conversation in other words. So we see the Buddha in paragraph 5 asking his audience, "What do you think, Kalamas? When greed, hatred, and delusion arise in a person, is it for their welfare or harm?" He reiterates the question in paragraph 7, converting intentions into words and actions with the words, "Kalamas, a person who is greedy, hating, and deluded, overpowered by greed, hatred, and delusion, their thoughts controlled by them, will destroy life, take what is not given, engage in sexual misconduct, and tell lies. They will also prompt others to do likewise. Will that not conduce to their harm and suffering for a long time? They will engage in the 4 defilements of action or karma kilesa that we are familiar with from the Sigalovada Sutta, and will encourage others to follow their example." What we see the Kalamas answering the Buddha in paragraph 6 is that it would cause that harm and long-term suffering further down the road. Turning to paragraph 10, the conversation continues with the Kalamas saying it is unwholesome. In paragraph 12, that it is blameworthy. In paragraph 14, that it is censured by the wise. And in paragraph 16, that undertaken and practiced, these things lead to harm and suffering. So in summary, in the Kalama Sutta, the Buddha is saying that rather than taking spiritual experts at their word, people can judge the value of truth statements for themselves based on the pragmatic implications for their own life. So if they can detect greed, hatred, or delusion in either the teacher or their words, then they should be avoided because they are unwholesome, blameworthy, censured by the wise, and undertaken and practiced will lead to harm and suffering in the future. The 3 unwholesome roots, according to the Buddha, underlie all immoral conduct and all defiled states of mind, since, in effect, the aim of the Buddha's teaching is the destruction of greed, hatred, and delusion from the mind of the practitioner. In fact, the whole of the previous sutta in the Anguttara Nikaya, called the Titiya Sutta, elaborates on the harm coming from greed, hatred, and delusion. The Buddha then returns to his refrain about the 10 untrustworthy sources of wisdom in paragraph 17, saying that this is why the Kalama should not rely on these sorts of information to validate truth claims. From there, having rejected unwholesome intentions in negative terms, the Buddha advocates embracing wholesome intentions in more affirmative terms. So in paragraph 18, the Buddha continues his Socratic questioning of the Kalamas with the words, "What do you think, Kalamas? When non-greed, non-hatred, and non-delusion arise in a person, is it for their welfare or harm?" He reiterates the question in paragraph 20, converting intentions into words and actions with the words, "Kalamas, a person who is without greed, without hatred, and without delusion, not overpowered by greed, hatred, and delusion, their thoughts not controlled by them, will abstain from destruction of life, from taking of what is not given, from sexual misconduct, and from false speech. It will also prompt others to do likewise. Will that conduce to their welfare and happiness for a long time?" What we see the Kalamas answering the Buddha in paragraph 19 is that it is for their welfare. In paragraph 21, that it is conducive to their long-term welfare and happiness. In paragraph 23, that it is wholesome. In paragraph 25, that it is blameless. In paragraph 27, that it is praised by the wise. And in paragraph 29, that undertaken and practiced will lead to welfare and happiness. So in summary, in the Kalama Sutta, the Buddha is saying that people can judge the value of truth statements for themselves, based on the pragmatic implications for their own life. So, if they can detect non-greed, in other words, unselfishness, liberality, and generosity, non-hatred, in other words, loving kindness, compassion, and sympathy, or non-delusion, in other words, wisdom, insight, knowledge, and understanding, implied in the teacher or their words, then they should be listened to because it will lead them to welfare and happiness in the future. The three wholesome routes, according to the Buddha, are like the goal for practice and self-cultivation. The Buddha then returns to the refrain of the 10 untrustworthy sources of wisdom in paragraph 30, saying that this is why he said the Kalama should not rely on these to validate truth claims. So having dealt with the wholesome and unwholesome routes as criteria by which we can judge truth claims for ourselves, before continuing, let's take a break halfway and settle ourselves for 30 minutes of meditation, which today is a recent minimalist-style recording of a meditation requested by Insight Timer listeners entitled "Less is More." If at this time you would like to find a comfortable sitting position for yourself as you listen to my guidance. So if you'd like to start by settling yourself into a comfortable position for our meditation practice, closing your eyes as gently as possible and allowing your whole body to settle into a comfortable but upright position by which you feel you could sit for as long as you like without needing to adjust yourself and without getting sleepy. Take as long as you need to scan down through the whole of your body, making sure each and every muscle is as relaxed as possible, all the way from the top of your head down to the tips of your toes, and relaxing all the muscles in between until it feels as if your whole body has melted away into the atmosphere around you. Put aside any worries or concerns in your mind, any thoughts of the past or the future. Remaining as much as possible in the present moment, with the here and now. And to relax your awareness further, conjure up a relaxed, joyful and happy state of mind. When you're ready, you can let your attention come to rest somewhere within the empty space of your body, and reconnect with the sense of peace inside yourself by bringing the focus of your attention gradually down to a place inside you, somewhere around the level of your solar plexus or diaphragm, and gently anchoring the mind in place, either reconnecting with the peaceful feeling there, or picturing inner brightness, something like a full moon, a twinkling star, or a sparkling diamond. If your mind wanders, just bring it back to the inner object. If the object disappears, you can conjure up a new one. If the object changes, just follow it in its new form. If thoughts bother you, simply ignore them or run interference by imagining you hear the sound of that traditional mantra, repeated silently in the mind with the words Samma Arahang over and over again, coming up silently from the center of the body until the thoughts are pacified. So we continue with our meditation, focusing inwardly, lightly and gently, for a few moments more now in silence. And as we meditate more, we become increasingly familiar with the idea of there being a space between our thoughts, a space between where one thought ends and another one begins. Because we start to find that we're able to step back from the thought we always take for granted. This allows us to gain access to that sense of spaciousness in the mind, spaciousness that lies beyond those thoughts, allowing us to touch upon that sense of clarity in the mind that brings with it a sense of resilience and stability. And as we engage with that sense of spaciousness more and more, we'll also notice the way in which any previous stresses and strains in the mind seem to gradually melt away, leading us to yet deeper levels of inner peace. But in the meantime, we still have to work with the phenomenon of the wandering mind and the thoughts arising. We need to learn to observe these mental phenomena, treating them as nothing more than the manifestation of impermanence in our mind. Observing without interfering how the thoughts and emotions arise and pass away naturally in the mind, without getting caught up in these. Treating them as no more significant than clouds or turbulence passing through a blue sky that is essentially clear. Sometimes it's as if we were just resting in the trough of a wave between the thoughts. And if we are silent, we can just keep our energy at the low part of the wave, noticing the shape of things and the flow, just accepting the drift of things and shifting away from the endless temptation to get entangled in that thicket of thoughts. So staying with the space between the thoughts, instants when the mind is still inventing the next thing it's going to think. By identifying with the stillness that is the backdrop to all these thoughts, we learn to access something deeper. It is of the nature of deep, peaceful intuition and wisdom. And once we have our first glimpse of it, then it will be something we recognize in future meditations, motivating us further to continue to develop these skills to the point that even if a sense of restlessness arises in the mind, we can even learn to watch the restlessness while disassociating from it, while remaining all the while in contact with that sense of spaciousness in the mind. And as our mind becomes unhooked from that restlessness or angst, allowing us to settle yet more deeply as we meditate for a few more moments now in silence until we come to the appropriate time for some loving kindness meditation. So we continue to rest the mind gently at the center of the body. With the awareness resting at the center of our body. We extend a loving kindness initially to ourselves, especially if you think you've messed up. Forgive yourself for not meeting your own unreasonable expectations. Again, resting the mind at the center of the body, but extending loving kindness further outward to everybody around you. Wishing all beings, human beings, and non-humans alike, be happy, live in peace and harmony. Further outward to cover the whole world, wishing all the people of the world to be happy, to be free from suffering, free from illness, spreading the loving kindness further out into space, the stars, and all the galaxies. We fill the whole universe with loving kindness and happiness from the center of the body. And at this time, you might turn your mind to loved ones who you know are going through difficult times at the moment, holding them close in the brightness at the center of ourselves. Bringing their names or their faces to mind with a wish that they manage to overcome their suffering with good grace and serenity. So we continue to make good wishes for ourselves and others, while spreading loving kindness for a few more moments now in silence. Sappa Buddhānuppāvēna, Sappa Dhammānuppāvēna, Sappa Saṅghānuppāvēna Sattha Bhavantu Te. So if you'd like to come to the end of your meditation for today, you can gradually open your eyes again. And if you feel at all uncomfortable, then slowly try changing to a more comfortable position before gradually finishing your practice. So picking up where we left off with our topic of the Kalama Sutta for today, we turn now to paragraph 31 of the manuscript, where the Buddha relates to the Kalamas, basically the qualities of mind that are free of greed, hatred, and delusion. He says that the mind that is free of these impurities gains the power to extend the 4 Divine Abidings. So the Buddha explains, then Kalamas, that noble disciple devoid of covetousness and ill will, unconfused, clearly comprehending, ever mindful, dwells, pervading 1 quarter with a mind imbued with loving kindness. Likewise the 2nd quarter, the 3rd quarter, and the 4th. Thus, above, below, across, and everywhere, and to all as to themselves, they dwell, pervading the entire world with a mind imbued with loving kindness, vast, exalted, measureless, without hostility and without ill will. So at this point, the Buddha is introducing a set of teachings called the Divine Abidings, or in Pali, brahmavihāra, starting with the development of universal loving kindness. He continues in paragraph 32 to explain how the other Divine Abidings of compassion, altruistic joy, and equanimity can be spread similarly in the absence of ill will. So, just by way of explanation, loving kindness or metta is defined as empathy for the suffering of all living beings. Compassion, or in Pali, karuna, is defined as the sense of urgency to alleviate all living beings of their suffering. Altruistic joy, or as I generally translate it, sympathetic joy, in Pali mudita, is rejoicing in the success and good fortune of others. Lastly, equanimity, which is the usual translation from the Pali word upekkha, is an attitude of impartiality towards living beings that helps you to be there for others, trusting their judgment without interfering unnecessarily in their lives. From there, having mastered the 4 Divine Abidings, the practitioner will gain a new level of self-assurance. In this connection, we see the Buddha explaining in paragraph 33 that when Kalamas, this noble disciple, has freed their mind of enmity and ill will, uncorrupted and pure, they will win 4 assurances in this very life. So, continuing on to paragraph 34, we see the first assurance they win is this: if there is another world, and if good and bad deeds bear fruit and yield results, it is possible that with the breakup of their body after death, they shall arise in a good destination in a heavenly world. Moving on to paragraph 35, we see the second assurance they win is this: if there is no other world, and if good and bad deeds do not bear fruit and yield results, still right here in this very life, they will live happily, free from enmity and ill will. In paragraph 36, we see the third assurance they win is this: suppose evil befalls the evildoer, then as I do not intend evil for anyone, how can suffering afflict me, one who does no evil deed? Lastly, in paragraph 37, we see the fourth assurance they win is this: suppose evil does not befall the evildoer, then right here I see myself purified in both respects. In conclusion, we see in paragraph 38, the Buddha says, when Kalamas, this noble disciple, has thus made his mind free of enmity, free of ill will, uncorrupted and pure, they will win these 4 assurances in this very life. So what the Buddha is saying is that as long as a person's mind is without enmity, ill will, corruption, or impurity, they will enjoy 4 self-assurances or spiritual solaces, or as they're known in Pali, assāsa. Namely, if karma and rebirth are true, they will have a good rebirth. If karma and rebirth are not true, they will still be happy right here in this life. If good and evil really exist, then they will face no bad karmic result because they have avoided incurring bad karma. And if neither good nor evil exists, they will remain pure and unaffected anyway. So this is a good piece of advice for anyone who still does good deeds while giving karma and rebirth the benefit of the doubt. So we return to paragraph 39 to see the outcome of the Buddha's teaching. We learn that the Kalamas were so impressed by the teaching that they exclaimed, "So it is, Blessed One, so it is, Sublime One. When this noble disciple has thus made their mind free of enmity, free of ill will, uncorrupted and pure, they will win these 4 assurances in this very life. Excellent Lord." And we learn at the end of the same paragraph that Kalamas took refuge in the Buddha for the rest of their lives with the words, "Let the Blessed One accept us as lay followers who have gone for refuge from today till life's end." So to conclude with some of the issues that Kalama Sutta raises, this sutta is often cited as the Buddha's carte blanche for following one's own sense of right and wrong, or a charter for free inquiry. So is it okay to doubt and challenge authority? Is it true that Buddhism, more than other religions, welcomes investigation as a path to wisdom? In answer to these questions, it would appear that Buddhism can be practiced to a certain extent without belief or guidance. However, it doesn't mean that you can make it up as you go along. There are advocates of secular Buddhism who have garnered a lot of popularity by claiming that Buddhism has avoided all the perceived weaknesses of organized religion by being totally malleable to individual needs, almost like an exotic snack station on a spiritual mix-and-match counter. Rather like the skeptical king in the Payasi Sutta, which I described back in session B056. Those secular Buddhists have rejected any metaphysical aspects of Buddhism that lack positivistic proof. For them, the ideal approach to Buddhism is being analytical on a Spockish level. However, a closer reading of the Kalama Sutta that we have attempted this time around does show that the Buddha advocates at least 2 overrides to believing in your own superior ability to judge truth statements. The first is the concept of being praised by or censured by the wise. This implies to a certain degree unquestioning acceptance of certain others as being wiser than oneself, and even the Kalamas consulting the Buddha about their doubts could be counted in this category. The second thing, which does seem to go unquestioned, is that certain actions may lead to either harm or suffering, or welfare and happiness further down the line. And although in the 4 kinds of self-assurance the Buddha leaves open the door on people's freedom to question rebirth and the inherent goodness or badness of actions, he does not expect that benefit of the doubt will lead people to enjoy happiness by antisocial acts of hedonism or abandonment of responsibility. So there seems to be limits on the scope of free thinking the Buddha is allowing for. Happiness in Buddhism is not counted as true happiness if it comes at the expense of others' well-being. Of course, there is the possibility, even these days, as in India in the ancient times, that there will be a glut of self-styled gurus claiming that they are wise and advocating unquestioning devotion by their followers, as if they are the ones with the right to praise or censure the actions of others. In this respect, the Buddha recommended guarding against becoming gullible prey to exploitative or possibly delusional cult leaders by investigating the teacher, the Buddha himself included, and scrutinizing the teacher for having succumbed to greed, hatred, and delusion, or inciting greed, hatred, and delusion in their followers. Only in such a way can spiritual disciples protect themselves against leaders' advice that might harm those disciples, and only in this way is it possible for disciples to develop worldview that will ultimately lead to spiritual progress rather than dependence. In the meantime, a novice practitioner still has a need of a mentor to guide them in the initial stages of their spiritual practice. Obviously, they are vulnerable to manipulation in the beginning, but Buddhism is full of advice for how faith can be developed in a way that is grounded in practice rather than erring onto the side of blind faith. I think this is the message of the sequence of the 38 blessings, where the very first step in the path is to avoid fools, associate with the wise, and pay respect to those worthy of respect. So in setting out on the path, a person needs to be cautious in the way they trust their heart to a potential spiritual guide. Probably the clearest guide to the stages of learning from a teacher that seems to come up to our standards is in the Anguttara Nikaya's 4 virtues conducive to growth, or as they are known in the Pali language, vuḍḍhidhamma, namely to start with association with good and wise persons, or sappurisa sangseva. Secondly, to listen attentively to the teaching, memorizing it, or saddhamma savana. Thirdly, analytical reflection, which I suppose you could characterize as critical examinations of the teachings learned, or yoniso manasikara. And lastly, practice in accordance with the Dhamma, in such a systematic way that all levels and aspects of the Dharma are in accord as regards to their respective purposes and living in conformity with the Dharma, or Dhammanudhamma Patipatti. Meanwhile, if the practitioner recognizes desire, ill will, or delusion springing up inside themselves, they need to apply their will to scrutinize, strive, and realize with the body the ultimate truth by penetrating it through wisdom. So, although the Kalama Sutta is a recipe for practitioners to protect themselves against blind faith, it does also highlight areas where it is safe or even advisable within the context of Buddhist practice to avail oneself of 4 types of faith that are the touchstone of Buddhist practice. Although they are only implied in the Kalama Sutta, they are more clearly listed in the Vibhanga. So, the 4 types of Buddhist faith include believing that actions count, or kammasattha. Secondly, Buddhists should believe that actions truly have karmic outcomes, or vipaka-sattha. Thirdly, Buddhists should believe in the individual ownership of actions, or kamma-sakkata-sattha. Lastly, Buddhists should believe that the enlightenment of the Buddha actually happened and allowed him to touch on the truth of life and the world, something known in Pali as Tathagata Bodhisattva. So if you don't believe that the Buddha's enlightenment actually established him in wisdom, then you are left without any pole star to guide you in your value judgments. So to be clear, we are not talking about dogmas that cannot be doubted on pain of eternal damnation, but I think the message from the Kalama Sutta, especially relevant to our post-truth era, is that it is healthy to be skeptical about truth claims within limits, and that greed, hatred, and delusion within oneself and within the person we choose as our spiritual mentor are the aspects that are most reliable in making our judgment of the validity of truth claims affecting our own spiritual path. So today we've been looking at the Kalama Sutta. For my next live session online, which will fingers crossed be a week on Sunday morning, we'll move on to look at the Lakkhana Sutta, which is a session about the 32 auspicious signs displayed on the body of the Buddha. So for good measure, I'd like to remind viewers to keep the questions coming in about meditation or topics that you have learned in the lecture to the email address that you can see spelled out in the slide, and I'll do my best to answer these on my next session. In the meantime, try to avoid recklessness or complacency, maintain a positive mood, speak only positive words, forgive others, extend good wishes to others, and meditate daily. Hopefully, as a result of today's session, you will be more of a refuge to yourself in assessing the truth claims you encounter on your spiritual path. So that's all for today. Thanks for viewing. So long, folks, and stay safe.